Hello, I'm Craig Constantine.
Hi, I am Johanna Patrice Hagarty.
Welcome, Joanna. Yeah, it's always a question of like, how much, like, should we do a practice run of the opening hello exchange? It's like, no, we're adults. I think we can just have fun with the hello, hi, back at you.
Well, and
It
I'm an
is,
awkward person anyway, so you're going to get awkwardness regardless. So,
let's do some awkward silence. That's good. And I'm not
oh, it's
cutting that out.
just about.
Yeah, there is a real magic, right? There's awkward silence, and then there's like awkward silence.
Yes, yes. We
Let's
could
not
push
push
it
it.
there, but let's share more on an actual show.
Yeah. Um. So, as everybody knows by now, I don't. We were so like serendipity, right? I'm like, how long have you been podcasting? And she's like, I actually think it's been a year. So I'm like, I love to celebrate and not just like I want to make up stuff that we can celebrate, but like 1 year is nothing to shake, a stick at. That's not. Just mix my metaphors. That's nothing to laugh at. That's quite an accomplishment. And I'm wondering, because like one of the things people always ask is how, well, okay, first they don't ask anything, but eventually if they do a few episodes, they start to wonder like, how am I going to keep doing this? Like, how am I going to keep going? And you mentioned that you have access to some other people who help you with it. And you and I, we were talking beforehand, we were talking about like your background, and there's a couple different ways that I can think to go here, but I think the interesting way that I want to go is, what does it mean to you to be a podcaster? Like, what is someone who identifies as a podcaster?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the term that we could use, which is sometimes I think a little outused, overused, whatever the phrase, but thought leader, really, I think
Hmm.
people who are choosing to commit to putting their voice and their words and their ideas on paper, on, audio and on video, all of that, you really are in a position of being a leader. And if you're using your own thoughts in that process, the thought leader is really the term that I would say. And for me, thought leaders are supposed to
Hmm.
bring community together, and we're supposed to have hard conversations about things, and we're supposed to move economic generations forward, right? And in business, in personal life, and mental health world. So really, I think that we are supposed to be leading in whatever realm we really choose is important for us to talk about.
Do you find, so I think that, and I agree with you. Just first of all, to be clear, sometimes I always get nervous about like, talking about like, I'm like, oh, right. Everybody else can't hear what's in my head because in my head, I'm like, I agree. Wait, say that out loud. I agree. Um, but I'm wondering if as I do, you have trouble like, 17, 22, 38, 50 episodes in, it's like, it's not like going to work, like I do the same thing again. I split more rocks. But where do you go to find, I'm going to say new ideas, but I don't mean like you have to reinvent your show every month and a half,
Right.
but like, where do you go to like, how do you show up on the 58th episode and go, press record. I got a thing. Like, how do you
Yeah.
get to that energy level?
I think that that is such a valuable question. And the way I set it up for me too is I am the kind of thought leader who wants to set the stage for other people to share their stories. So
Mm-hmm.
my leadership style is actually just getting the platform and then bringing other individuals. So the way it's exciting for me is I have a different guest every single time. So now I'm up
Mm.
to, I guess, close to 50 episodes. I think I missed a week or two
That's
in the process. I
right.
know, amazing. And so in that process, I've had 50 or so different individuals who have come and shared their stories. And my podcast is really focused on artists and art professionals. And that's a lot of the niche that I work in. And so it's just fascinating to talk with musicians and poets and writers and event producers and graphic designers and drummers. How is that not fun?
Mm. Yeah. I would totally agree. Being in roughly the same, I talk to other humans space. Yes. That's, in fact, I sometimes create entire projects, Exhibit A, entire projects because I want to just have more conversations with people. And in particular, I wanted to have more conversations with people who are passionate about podcasting, which is like a plosives test, right? And I thought, well, how about if I just made a show and removed all the parts that were a pain in the butt or that take time or that cost money and just invite people to come have cool conversations? Is there anything about and I don't know if you only have first of all, name of the show?
The name of the show is the Johanna Patrice Hagarty Show. And it is hosted on the Biz Radio Asheville in Asheville, North Carolina. Not sure if you're familiar with this area, but it is gorgeous around here. And so I'm really, really partial to being able to work
Ironically,
with.
I may be there in a week, believe it or not.
Great,
I'm
well,
like,
come visit.
okay,
I'll show you
we
around.
need a bigger planet. Yeah, we need a bigger planet. I'm like, wait, and you're like, when you say Western North Carolina, I'm like, you have to be in Asheville.
Yeah, and I
That's a whole
honestly,
nother story.
I love living in the outskirts too, and I'm looking for an artist retreat land out there as well. But really, to me, again, Buzz Radio Asheville is a local radio station for music. Biz Radio Asheville is a local radio station for business, and I get to be connected to both of them through this process. And so I just couldn't be happier that it's not me cutting through all of this noise to try and speak my mind. I get to collectively
Right.
do that with a team of other people who are in their own thought leader spaces too. So.
Hmm. What would happen if you had to do it all by yourself?
It wouldn't get done as frequent and as well quality. I am sure of it. I mean,
That's
that's
what
what
I
one of
thought.
the things you said too about podcasting. Again, just that having to get up and running, doing all the tech stuff. I'm really good at having people on the shows, having conversations. I'm not great at technology. So my producer of 30 years, Matt Matan, he's the one who can come in and say, hey, I have all this experience. I can come in, I can show you how to do this. I can get this part done for you. I can help you, which is really valuable for me.
Yeah, even if so, like a lot of people I think who are listening have podcasts or they're like thinking about it or they're on episode 100, and I think that's the biggest challenge is finding another mind or two or seven who are passionate, so you can go, oh, I got this great idea, and they don't like their eyes don't glass over. Like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? So I think that's probably the magic sauce is to be able to find other people that you can share that stuff with and almost like a jazz musician riff off of their ideas. And
Yeah.
so
And there's
what
strength in
do
numbers in the marketing side of that
yes.
too, right? Again, it's not just me having to cut through, it's all of us collectively sharing this one website with multiples. And then I get to have that information on my personal websites, my multiple business websites, so that all kind of just brings it back together, which is exciting.
Yeah. Are there things so is this your first podcast? Like, is this the first thing that you've created? I'm wondering, like, no matter how much, like, so not my personal opinion here, no matter how much the thing that I create was my idea, eventually it's like, okay, this is getting a little like, I've done this like a couple times now, not this particular show, but like,
Mhm.
are you starting to think, ooh, I could also do like, what's the next podcast going to be? What's the next project going to be now that you've seen what this one can do?
That is a great question. And I think for me, I coined myself as an economic development specialist. And I even take that one step further and I call myself an arts economic development specialist, which is not necessarily a moniker most people have, or even one that is a true definition. But what I love about that is that I work with artists and creatives in the whole spectrum. So people who are just starting in their career, right? The early entry point, all the way into those people who are making 6, 7 figures in their business. So for me, podcasting was one tool and one component of that. I'm not sure I will need to do more than one show to really achieve that. Now, what I do know is there are lots of other projects and lots of other ideas that I can use this podcast to support, right? More event
Hmm.
production, more community building. I really have this long term goal of an artist retreat center. So the podcast itself can grow, but I'm not sure if the foundational knowledge needs to be more than one show because it's about arts and it's about economy. And that's a pretty broad topic you can talk about for a long, long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see, something like, did we talk about this before or after I pressed the big red button? We were talking at some point before or after I pressed record about that this isn't your first foray into like audio as a medium. And I'm wondering, are there lessons from the radio industry? Maybe we can flip it around. Like, are there things that you see other podcasters do that you think maybe if they had come from a radio background, they would choose to do differently, or things that you think your radio background has informed, yeah, how you
Mm.
do things in podcasting?
Well, and again, I kind of said earlier, like 30 years. What I meant to really be clear about that was that my producer, Matt, has 30 years experience in radio. And so
Yeah.
I am a brand new person in this side. But again, we were mentioning I was doing publicity. And so I have sit on the other side of sending out press releases. And so honestly, for me, one of the biggest things is getting on a podcast, right? So an individual who is interested in having their story told is actually not as difficult as we sometimes feel it might be.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that actually is a big piece of feedback. But for podcasters, I think in the same vein, really showing up in the circles, right? For you, you are someone who talks to other podcasters. So being on the platforms where we are, right? Connecting with other
Right.
podcasters. We got hooked up through one of our colleagues who's another podcaster. So being in these worlds where your industry is having the conversation is so valuable. And so that to me is the radio conversation. Radio has multiple shows, multiple things, multiple, collaborative ideas that are collectively coming. So if you're solo as a podcaster, you need to go find a community to get involved in and connect with so you have those options too.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's sometimes it's called act as if, and sometimes they just say fake it till you make it. And on one hand, it's like, oh, that's kind of offensive because like you're implying that what we do is so easy. We can, that a person over there can
Yeah.
just fake it. But there is definitely, if you act as if, whatever you want to talk about, podcasting, radio, whatever, if you act as if the people that are seeing you act, I'm air quoting act, the people who are seeing you act, they don't know the other you or any other you. They go,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, you look like a podcaster or you sound like a podcaster. So maybe I'll ask you a podcasting question or maybe I'll give you a podcasting opportunity. And I think when people say fake it till you make it, I think that downplays the role that the other people have in
Right.
offering you opportunities. And so
Right.
when when people say act as if, and then opportunities arise. So I agree with you. I like that idea of, yeah, if you just get in the swimming pool, then things will come up, and it's not like a foofy positivity like the universe will provide for me if I just like, no, you have to do the work,
Right.
you have to show up and take the licks.
And I'm actually a huge fan of both sides. Primarily what I'm focused on right now, my business, which is called Art Hero, is educating artists on business. And so what we basically go through is what I call the ABCs of business. And when you think about ABCs, you think about foundational knowledge, you think about learning. The first time you got into a pool, the first time you tried to write or anything, right? It was clunky, it
Right.
was messy, it was
That's a
awkward,
mess.
So I think that it's even one step before having to fake it till you make it. It's just being willing to try is really valuable. And so for me, again, I had been in so many other worlds in the podcast adjacent scene that I
Hmm.
knew I was good at talking to people. I knew I was really good at bringing big ideas to the table. And so that's really what it's about. If you know that you fit in this world, but you just maybe haven't tried podcasting, get out there. If you hate the sound of your voice and freeze every time you jump on air or even call your grandma or something,
Might
maybe
work on that, right?
podcasting isn't the avenue for you. So I think that there's always these ways to say, what are the basic skill sets I have? Who am I? And then what is the best avenue for me to really take that to the next level?
Cool. What was there anything on anything on your mind when you were on your way to the recording session? Because and the people who are listening, everybody's invited. It's like self-serve. You can just slot yourself into my schedule. But I tell people once they grab their spot, it sends you like a, hey, you're confirmed. And then in the message, I write like, there's no need to prepare. There's no need to show up early. And that turns out to be like a really some people would say that's a generous gift. I'm like, no, it's just me trying to make it easy.
Right.
And I'm just thinking like, are there things that so when you showed up, you're like, that was cool. Like I can do that. I can do not prepare.
I
Um,
appreciate the
but I know that
informality
you
of the
normally do
process.
prepare. And I'm wondering, in the back of your head, the front of your head is going, don't prepare, but the back of your head was probably preparing anyway. Are there things that you were thinking, like, I wonder if we'll get to dot, dot, dot? Like, were there topics in mind?
It's interesting because the first question you asked before we even got on air was, what does podcasting even mean to you? And that's really what it spurred, because I still am kind of trying to identify myself as a podcaster, as a radio host, as all of these labels. And so I really loved that it just kind of made me think about that concept of who am I? How do I label myself?
Mm.
And do I even have advice to offer other podcasters? And I really love the concept again of being in a unique space where my show is actually kind of produced through a radio show and then it gets to be in this podcast platform. And so just the things that kept bubbling up was I do things a little bit differently, kind of all around the board. My business website is arthero.biz. And if you show up there, the very first thing it says is making business fun is a rebellious act. And so that's really what I focus on is how do we make it fun? And so I guess I just was floating around with the idea of people who are really interested in sharing their ideas. Podcasting is terrifying sometimes. There is so many logistics. So start to find some of the tools that make it easier. What are some of the podcasting sites that are a little comprehensive? What's going to do some of the, distribution process? What's going to do some
Yeah.
of the,
Yeah, some of those tools, I'm like, okay, that tool's kind of cool. People are like, yeah, look, you can just open this up and edit and say, what? Like,
I
okay,
mean,
I mean, I'm
nowadays you can almost find a tool for everything. So again, if you really feel like being a podcaster is important to you and you're working on it and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this every week, start to think about different methods, do batching, right? Do 5 or 6 episodes at the
yeah,
very beginning of the month and then, whatever works for you. And the work that I do with creatives, which I imagine almost all podcasts have a little bit of that art of
yep,
creative brain, we have to really work around ourselves. And again, that concept of what tools work for you, what time frame works for you. I decide to record weekly so that if I miss a week or two, I can put 2 on there. I can get stacked ahead, So just finding the tools and the systems. I tested out doing my podcast for an hour at one point and I realized that was just too much. It was too long. People weren't as interested in the content. They couldn't get into the meat of it. So we moved it back to a half hour. Just be willing to test things out and try, right?
yeah. It always surprises me how I get ossified. Like, I don't know, I've always done it that way. Like, and then when I back out and go, but why is it that way? Like, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
something you pick up habits, you pick up mannerisms, you pick up things you like to say. My
And
team
you
jokes about,
unintentionally start judging what's working and what's not. Again, as a business coach in particular, I have these people
yes.
come and they say, oh, well, Facebook never worked for me. I'm like, well, what did you do? They're like, well, I posted on my personal page about my business. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, cool. Let's look at this, right? And we can kind of get into the nitty gritty. So I go so much into key performance indicators. We talk all about how do you track information in your business. And for a lot of artists and creatives, they're like, what? That's terrifying. But I'm like, okay, with Instagram, how many followers? Are you having more followers or less followers? That's a key performance indicator. Are you having people buy from you online if you're making sales online or not? Like it can be basic and simple too. So I try to take high level concepts and break it down and say, you can achieve anything you want. And I think podcasting is one of those that feels unattainable sometimes, but is not. It's totally within everybody's grasp.
Do you think there's my I'm drawn to the connection between drawn to my microphone too as I swat it. I'm drawn to the connection between audio and creatives. So I'm
Mm,
wondering if there are people out there who they don't think of themselves as being creative, like because when we say the C word, they're thinking painter or
right.
sculptor.
You really do have the word creative get put into arts a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if maybe audio, and I'm chuckling because it's like it's not easy, but audio just feels so easy, right? You just press record. How hard could this be? Oh, you'll find out. And I'm just wondering if there's something about audio that opens up access. Grammar backwards fail opens up so art gets pigeonholed as sorry backwards. Creativity gets pigeonholed as art
Yep.
and audio doesn't feel like art, although it is. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if this doesn't open up a gateway to a different pie slice of the creatives out there for you. Like, have you discovered that because you're doing this in audio, you're having access to different kinds of creatives?
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. I'd also say that video nowadays, particularly for creatives, they're really receiving that well, but that still includes audio. So you get this
Right.
visual and then you get this audio conversation. And to be quite honest, one of the new apps that I love the most is Clubhouse because it's just audio, right? And I
Hmm.
get to show up in my PJs, don't have to worry about anything, and I can have a really authentic conversation. So I would say that using audio is such a valuable tool. And like you said, we are pushing record, have no real clue what's going to come up. And this is creativity. We have created a piece of art
Right.
out of this moment, out of this time. And it's really beautiful and powerful to timestamp that, put it out there and say, here's my stuff, receive
Mm.
it. Right. That's
Yeah.
not always easy for people. There's that limiting belief of, oh my gosh, who's going to want to even hear what I have to say too. So
Cool. As much as I always hate to say it, I think that's a great place to stop for today. Uh,
sure.
Joanna, thank you for taking time out of your morning. Hope the weather is nice down in Asheville. And thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It's been such a pleasure. I will always rap about the creative economy. I will be happy to talk about, what it means to use our words in a creative capacity to really share thoughts and move ideas forward. So, thank you for what you do with the podcast.